Okay, so any questions? Anyone? No questions? Okay. Yes, Nagendra?
Sir, I had a doubt about.
Yes.
Sir, I'm audible.
You're audible.
So, do you want mind? Can you open the PDF?
Yes. Okay.
In that orthonormal basis,
Mm-hmm.
the previous slide of this.
Okay.
No, sir, previous slide. Uh, the next slide, sir. The next slide. This one. Change of basis and orthonormal basis. Sir,
Yes.
here, yes.
Hmm.
Here, finding out the 4 1 minus 3, this point with respect to 1 0 0 0 1 0 0 0 1 means it's nothing but from x axis, y axis, z axis, we are locating a point 4 1 minus 3. Is it right, sir?
That's right.
So,
So,
sir, can you explain with me a graph? I want to know about b into y. I mean, locate the 1.8, 3.6 to 3.05. From these, can you help me out of this?
that is what I showed here in yesterday's this
Yes,
two-dimensional
yes.
graph,
Can
right? Three-dimensional, it is difficult to draw, so we can discuss in two dimensions. So point P, this is the position vector point which comprises, I mean, I can write this as position vector R, right? And position vector R is essentially X and Y. And this is what we are writing as, uh, if you want to have that representation, right? Now,
yes, sir.
this position vector R can also be written as x prime and y prime in the new frame of reference, x prime, y prime. Right now, what is the direction of x prime, y prime? X prime would be oriented, if I refer to x prime, then this vector itself can be written as, let's say, vector r prime x, and this is r prime y, right? So then r prime x becomes the one basis vector, and r prime y becomes the another basis vector, mutually orthogonal. Now if I take this position vector, I mean a unit vector, of course the length will be unity. If I take its projection along x and projection along y, then this is what becomes new vector, right? R prime x and r prime y. So these are the two unit vectors that we will have, and in terms of that we have these coordinates x prime, y prime, and the position vector r remains the same. So the same point P can be represented as new coordinates x prime, y prime with respect to new base vectors r x prime and r y prime, right? So what you see here, uh, these are the coordinates, these are the projection of this new base vector along x direction along y direction and along z direction, or this is the dot product of this new base vector along I, j and k. So these are the three base vectors which have these components along x, y and z directions. So with reference to the x, y, z coordinate system, so these are the direction of those vectors, and we use these vectors, new vectors, as the basis. And with respect to this new basis, what is the coordinate of the same point which has the coordinates 4, 1, minus 3 with respect to this particular I, j, k frame of reference? That is what we are doing here.
Understood, sir.
Okay. So now we go back to the discussion on Gram-Schmidt orthogonalization. The whole idea, we agree that while a set of linearly independent vectors is sufficient for construction of a basis or for representing any arbitrary vector in n-dimensional space, because each of these n number of vectors is going to add some new information as long as they are linearly independent. And then as many, it's a simple as many variables and as many equations. So as long as we can accommodate all possible information that can be represented, so with that said, we should be able to take care of any point as a linear, any position vector, any vector in n-dimensional space as a linear combination of basis vectors. So choice of independent basis vectors is not so difficult. I mean, any random vectors that you choose, they will be linearly independent and they can theoretically serve as a basis. But these linearly independent vectors, they do not help much in mathematical analysis, because they do not give us any benefit in solving problems. But if we impose a little stronger requirement that the vectors should not only be independent, they should also be orthogonal, then orthogonal set of vectors, they provide a lot of convenience, and the structure becomes very simple. Many a times it becomes it makes a difference between whether a problem can be solved and whether it cannot be solved. In one frame of reference, the problem seems very difficult and almost unsurmountable. But if we transform it into an orthogonal basis using orthogonal transformation, then suddenly the problem becomes so simple, and you will realize that in your theory of vibrations course, when you come across the solution of equation of motion for coupled equations of motion, coupled differential equation for multi-degree freedom system. So that seems a very difficult proposition, but the moment you impose orthogonality condition in mode superposition method, then suddenly the solution becomes very easy and almost trivial. So it pays a great deal. I mean, it's a good investment if you can understand the process of orthogonalization, and it's a very straightforward and logical process, and we will try to go through the process slowly. Please interrupt me wherever you want to interrupt or wherever you are unable to understand the basic issues, what I am doing, and I will be using the computational platform of Octave. So let's start.
Sir, 1 minute.
Yes.
Sir, this vectors u1, u2 up to un, they
Yeah.
are linearly independent, right? But
Yes.
do they themselves form a basis?
Yes, yes. They can form a basis. As long as they are linearly independent, they can form a basis. And how do you check for linear independence, whether they are linearly independent or not?
Sir, if their determinant is equal to 0, then
Yes.
then we can
If
say that
if this matrix of where these vectors form columns, if the determinant of that matrix is uh, 0, then of course it's a then the dependence exists. At least there is one pair which is dependent on each other, which is not independent.
sir, but does it means that not only like if even if they are linearly independent, it doesn't mean that they form a basis. But in this Gram-Schmidt orthogonalization, is it necessary that they must be linearly independent and they must form a basis?
See, why do you say that if they are linearly independent, then they do not form a basis?
Sir, because to form a basis, there are two conditions, right? Like they must be linearly independent and they must span the vector space. So we
They
have to
will.
check whether
I
they
mean,
span
they
the
will.
vector
They
space.
will span the vector space. If they are linearly independent, they will span the vector space. They are. I mean, it's not. Uh, it is not something that if a set of vectors, I mean, complete set of vectors, n-dimensional space, then I need n number of independent vectors. And if I can find n number of linearly independent vectors in n-dimensional space, then these n number of linearly independent vectors will definitely span the space.
Okay, sir. Got it.
Right. Okay, so we launch GNU Octave. So okay. So I am intentionally using the graphical version so that you can see that it is almost a similar interface as MATLAB if you are familiar with MATLAB. So that will probably uh, help you overcome some of the fears that you might have of command line interface that I used yesterday. So to begin with, let us start with n number of independent vectors. So let's say 4-dimensional space, just to make life a little more interesting. So so U is a matrix which will be populated 4 by 4 matrix will, and the rand n is a random number generator from normal distribution of zero mean and unit variance. So all of them will be random numbers. So I don't expect that the columns of the matrix that we will get from this, they will be related to each other anyway. But let us see. So to see that, we can find out what is the determinant of U, and obviously it is non-zero. So this is fine. Now let's start with extracting the columns, individual columns. So U1, I am extracting, this is this colon stands is the wildcard for including all rows, and second index is of course referring to the first column. So I am extracting first column of U and storing it in U1, vector U1. So this is what vector U1 is, and similarly I do it for all columns, and let me just do it for once. So if I terminate it by semicolon, then the output is suppressed. So u2 and u3, the output is suppressed, and u4, it is again displayed. So now we have these four columns, four vectors, u1, u2, u3 and u4, which are linearly independent, and we need to convert this into an orthonormal basis, right? And they are not orthonormal. We can see that let's say, or let's just say, if they have an orthogonal, then the product u transpose u would be identity, but as you can see, it is anything but identity matrix. So these vectors u, they are not orthogonal with respect to each other. So the purpose is that now the Gram-Schmidt orthogonalization process is aimed at nudging these vectors, starting from these independent vectors, trying to derive an orthogonal basis from this, right? As it is, these vectors are good enough to serve as a basis, but it is not convenient, and it does not serve, it does not help in any way in our mathematical analysis of the problem, of any problem. Orthogonal basis has many desirable properties and many simplifications that arise because of orthogonal basis, and therefore it is a requirement that from a given independent set of vectors, you generate a set of orthogonal bases. So first vector is very simple, we just have to normalize it to unit length. So normalizing of unit length is, let's say, scale factor is norm u1. So this is the length. So if you want to see what I have done, norm u is let's say temp sum of squares of u1 is this, and then I compute square root of sum of squares of u1, and that is what you get in the norm of u1. So that is scale. So these two operations I perform by using this norm. I can be more specific about this. I want second norm or the length norm, right? If you want, it can be norm can be different values of p also, but what we are looking at is the length norm, and therefore this p value has to be equal to 2, and that is the default argument. If you omit the value for the type of norm or the power of the norm, then it is assumed to be 2, Euclidean length norm. So then we define q1 as 1.0 divided by scale multiplied by u1. So this is now unit length, and if you can, if you want to confirm, then this is just compute the norm of q1, and that is works out to u1. Now we take the second vector u2. Now let me do a little bit of working out. So we assume let us assume that q1, q2, q3 and q4 are orthonormal base vectors. So then I know that u2, vector u2 will be given by, let's say, c21 q1, c22 q2 plus c23 q3, c24 q4, right? q1, q2, q3, they are orthonormal base vectors. So far we have only q1. We don't know what are q2, q3, q4 are, right? We don't know them yet. But we know that by definition q1, q2, q3, q4, they are orthonormal. They are orthogonal to each other, and each of these vectors will have unit length. And by definition, any vector u2 will be a linear combination of these orthogonal base vectors. And c21, c22, c23, c24, they are the coordinates with respect to these bases. So if u2 is a vector, then c21 measures to what extent q1 participates in making up u2, or in other words, c21 is the projection of u2 along q1. c22 is the projection of u2 along q2. How does this happen? Let us work out. Let us take the dot product with respect to q1. q1 transpose u2, so that's the dot product between q1 and u2, and this will be equal to c21 q1 transpose q1 plus c22 q1 transpose q2 c23 q1 transpose q3 c24 q1 transpose q4. Now by definition q1 is an orthonormal vector, so this is unity, right? We just saw that q1 transpose q1, that's the sum of square of elements of q1 is equal to unity. And by definition q1 is orthogonal to all other base vectors u2, q2, q3, q4. So this is going to be 0, this is going to be 0, and this is going to be 0. This is by definition, we don't have to compute it. And since we don't have to compute it, we don't have to know what q2, q3, q4 are, right? So then it boils down to what is c21, and as I told you earlier, c21 is the projection of u2 along q1, and that's what this is. So if I want to compute, so this is the magnitude, c21 is the magnitude of q1 which goes into making u2, right? So u2 will be defined as c21 times q1. So that, I mean, q1 is scaled by a factor c21, so that's the magnitude. And then that vector, this particular q1 multiplied by c21, this is added to this vector, and then it is added to this vector, and then it is added to this vector to make up this u2. So if I want to remove everything, whatever u2 has along q1, then I just need to remove this trace. Subtract this from u2 to remove any contribution from Q1 to U2. So I define U2 hat as U2 minus Q1 multiplied by C21, right? C21 is a scalar, so it really doesn't matter where I put it, whether I put it before this or after the vector, doesn't matter. So I can now write this as, substitute the value of C21 from here. Right? So what have I done? U2 had this much contribution coming from Q1, and this is what I quantified knowing Q1, and then I removed these traces from U2. So this resulting vector will not have, this term C21 Q1 gets cancelled by this term. So the remaining vector will only have this representation, right? So this is called, and I can, if you are attentive enough, then you can immediately identify that I can take U2 vector as a common factor here. Right? So what have I done here? This is called the sweeping matrix. So sweeping matrix, if I multiply sweeping matrix with U1, this sweeping matrix S1 with U1, then the effect of this linear transformation is that all contributions from Q1 will be removed from U2. So let us work out this. So I define S as, to begin with, identity matrix, and now once I have this Q1, I modify S as S minus Q1 multiplied by Q1 transpose. So this is the new sweeping matrix. And if I multiply this matrix with U2, so I get define Q2 as S times U2. So this is Q2. Let us see if this is this satisfies our original plan. Whether this new vector is it orthogonal with Q1. So I just take the dot product between Q1 and Q2, and result is 0. Don't be misled by this result of 0, absolute 0. This is just a round off result. This, just because you are seeing here 0 does not mean that this 0 has actually been computed. It is just truncating the numbers to give you this illusion of 0. But it's orthogonal enough to the machine precision. It is almost as
Hello, sir.
yes.
Sir, this sweeping matrix when multiplied with U2, so it means that it is removing the contribution from Q1 to U2.
It is removing contribution of Q1
Of
in
Q1
in U2.
from U2.
Yes.
In U2. So the step that you wrote, Q2 is equal to S1 into U2. So that is step where I got confused, sir. Q2, how come Q2 is equal to that?
No. So I'm calling this as what I'm referring to here as u2 hat. I'm writing it as q2. This vector that you see
Okay,
here,
U2
u2 hat, I'm calling this as q2 because there is no way I can possibly type this hat character in on that command line.
Okay, sir.
Okay, I could have as well said, I mean, just if you want, I can just say, just to, okay, u2 hat. So there, happy now?
Actually, I got confused because when we find Q1, so in case of Q1, we use 1 by scale into U1.
Yes. So now I
So
will do
then,
that. Now I will do that.
then I confused with the name
So
because when
scale is
Q1,
equal to norm of u2 hat second norm, and then I define q2 as 1.0 scale multiplied by u2 hat. So this is q2, right?
yes, sir, got it, sir.
So now what this sweeping matrix has done, if I multiply this sweeping matrix with any vector, then it will remove the traces of q1 from that vector, right? Because this projection thing has already been built into that, and the sweeping operation with respect to q1 has already been built into that. So this is not just limited to u2. This sweeping matrix can work on any arbitrary vector, and it will remove the traces whatever q1 has in making up that vector. That trace will be removed, right? So now we can augment this sweeping matrix because q1 sweeping is already there. Now that we have q2, I can augment this sweeping matrix as S is equal to S minus q2 multiplied by q2 transpose, right? Now this new sweeping matrix, which modifies this identity matrix by removing the traces of q1, and then in addition to removing traces of q1, it also now removes the traces of q2. So now I can define u3 hat as S multiplied by u3. So this will remove the traces of, so this will remove so again, if I want to define u3, u3 hat will be equal to u3 minus C31 q1, or I would just say q1 multiplied by C31 minus q2 multiplied by C32, and we know that C31 is going to be q1 transpose u3, q2 is going to be C32 is going to be q2 transpose u3. So this is going to be I minus q1 transpose minus q2 transpose u3, right? And that is what I have done here. we already had this sweeping matrix earlier, I minus Q1 transpose. So I just added one more term here, Q2 transpose, uh, in defining this new sweeping matrix. And U3 hat will be computed as this, and I can now again define scale as norm of U3 hat, second norm, and scale it. So define Q3 as 1.0 scale multiplied by U3. So now if you wish, you can compute Q1 transpose Q3. Aha.
Sir, you missed U3 hat
Where
while
did I-
scaling. Sir, Q3 equals to 1 over scale into U3 hat.
No, I did that. This is the scale norm of U3 hat,
Sir, the next line,
scale
and below that one.
Q3 is equal to 1 by 0. Oh, this has to be U3 hat, sorry. U3 hat, fine. So now if you look at it, so this is almost 0. So Q2 transpose Q3 is again 0. And now we add, just to take it to the conclusion, we can now add the sweeping of Q3. So just add one more term to this series, minus Q3 multiplied by Q3 transpose, to take away the traces of Q3 from any vector. So this is new sweeping matrix, and then I define U4 hat as S multiplied by U4, define scale as norm of U4 hat, second norm, and Q4 as 1.0 scale multiplied by U4 hat. Right? And I define now Q as Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. So these are the four vectors, and just to tell you, show you that they are indeed orthogonal, let's take Q transpose Q, and you have something which is identity matrix to the machine precision. Right? Off diagonal terms, they are all, as you know, we can't get exact 0, so these are as close to 0 as we can get off diagonal terms, and so that shows Q1 is indeed orthonormal matrix Q. So that is what the whole Gram-Schmidt orthogonalization process is. We start from a set of linearly independent vectors and gradually remove the traces of orthogonal basis as we construct them, and in the end we end up with n number of, complete set of orthogonal basis functions which can be used for further analysis. So I can write in general sweeping matrix to remove basis of M orthonormal vectors from any arbitrary vector is S is equal to I minus sigma I is equal to 1 to M QI transpose. So subsequently any vector can be made orthogonal to previously computed m number of base vectors by multiplying with this sweeping matrix, and after normalizing to unit length one more term can be added to this, and subsequently new sweeping matrix can be used to derive the orthogonal vectors. So any questions? So this is in essence what Gram-Schmidt orthogonalization is. Of course, if you do not normalize the vectors after orthogonalization, then this term then there is a denominator in each of these terms which will take care of the length. So normalization process. So it's either you normalize it while constructing this orthogonal vectors, or you need to normalize it during construction of sweeping matrix. So whichever way you look at it, but normalization will be required at some point. So any questions? Is this clear now? Gram-Schmidt orthogonalization.
Yes, sir. Clear, sir.
Good. So now let
Yes,
me.
sir.
Okay. So now let me go through the last two slides, which I had actually rushed through yesterday about the norms. So we can actually. So the need for norms is how do you compare the vectors? You can only compare scalars to another scalars. You can only compare between two persons whether someone is taller or shorter, so that is a length measure, or someone weighs more or less, so that's a measure of the mass of the any body. So the idea is you can only compare between two numbers. But what to do when you are dealing with a set of numbers? So you can have a vector, or for that matter even function. How do I say whether one vector is close or away from another vector? Or how do I say whether one function is good enough or is close enough to another function? And I mean, this is not a hypothetical question. I mean, you should understand that we are, finite element method, I keep on emphasizing that it is an approximate solution. So when we say approximate solution, then we need to know, does the approximate solution converge to the true solution? And when I say it is converging, then how do I assess? I mean, the whole idea of convergence is when I get two subsequent assessment and I do not see any change in them or significant difference in them, right? and that involves a comparison. And that brings us to this whole business of norms. How do I compare? Uh, so, I mean, in order to say, let us say, I have two vectors, let's say x1 and x2. Let's say this is n by 1 and this is also n by 1 vector. How to determine, how to assess if x2 does not differ significantly from x1. Right? So this is the question that we have. How do I, okay, sorry about that, lines are going all over the place. So how do I ascertain this? So one way to say this is exactly identical, x2 minus x1, if this is equal to null vector, then x2 is exactly identical to x1. But this is a theoretical result. I mean, if any process of approximation can only approach true solution asymptotically, and we can never approach the true result. So this exactly identical business will never happen. And secondly, this is never going to be equal to 0 on a computer. So you can throw it out. But then these are all elements are identically equal to 0. This is a null vector. Null vector, so that each element of x2 is same as each element of x1. Right? So this is not something that we will experience very often, or that happens very often. x2, some elements of x2 may deviate to the left of corresponding element of x1, some elements of x2 may deviate to the right of corresponding element of x1, and so on. So the numbers may be close, but they may not be identical. So how do we compare between such results? So the idea is we are looking at situation like this. This is x1 position. I mean, all these vectors, let's say this is n-dimensional position vector. So all of these, if this is n by 1, then this represents the position vector in n-dimensional vector space. So x1 is a position vector and x2 is another position vector. And x2 minus x1 is this vector. If you know the force polygon from your applied mechanics course. So this is the difference. Residual R or error, that is equal to x2 minus x1. So what we are trying to do here is the closeness between two vectors can be ascertained if this magnitude R is close to 0. If magnitude of R is small enough, then x2 can be said to be a close approximation of x1. Now small enough, that is what we normally refer to as the tolerance or tolerance of convergence, and all of us are familiar with the concept of tolerance, so error tolerance. So as long as this difference is smaller than this tolerance, then it is considered to be close enough, and that is where these vector norms are actually used. They come into play. So I guess I have again hit the time barrier. So you have a class.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I'll stop the recording here and we can